The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations, it was headed by Michelle Bachelet. And in May of 2022, late May of 2022, 23rd to the 28th, Michelle Bachelet went to Xinjiang. She went to Kashgar. She went to Urumqi. She met with Chinese officials. She met with people in the region. She met with business leaders. She met with nonprofits, NGOs. She met with many institutions, religious leaders, civic leaders, and ordinary people. She met also with Wang Yi, the foreign minister, Xi Jinping, the president. She had a really comprehensive trip. And her statement, which we will get to, was not satisfactory to the elite. Her statement refused to acknowledge forced labor, refused to acknowledge genocide, even praised China being a signatory to many UN resolutions, as well as various agreements on the international stage, which signify China's commitment to human rights. So there was some praise and there was some concerns, right? She did raise some concerns. A lot of it was, oh, well, I've heard this, I've heard X, I've heard people can't get in touch with each other because of the policies that China has employed. So I'm concerned about that. But there was nothing to the level of genocide or forced labor or anything like that. And the Department of State, the U.S. State Department, Antony Blinken, the whole Western corporate media, the Western political class went absolutely unhinged on her. They called her an apologist. They said that she needed to retract what she said. If she wasn't going to retract, then she needed to follow up. So ever since then, the whole entire summer, the Western and U.S.-led Western imperialist ruling class has been placing pressure on this one specific office, this one specific institution within the United Nations to release another report. And of course, what happened? Well, the OHCHR, this body, caved to the pressure. And on September 1st, August 31st, really, but on August 31st, another report was released. And this report, rather than being a statement, which was around 12 minutes long speech, so what is that? 1,200 words, usually 1,200, 1,500 words. This was 48 pages long. And I told all of you that I wasn't going to do anything on this, that I just couldn't look at another one of these dastardly, ridiculous, propagandistic so-called reports, so-called research on Xinjiang, and explain the same things over and over again. But you know what? This report, of course, got the treatment in the Western media that things like this always get, which is high praise, evidence, open and shut case is there. China is committing human rights abuses. And an astute person in the chat has already said that there's no genocide, no forced labor claims. There's some claims of forced labor in it. There's some claims of forced labor. But really, it's kind of like labor malpractice, you could call, or labor exploitation. That's really what's claimed here. But let's get into the report, okay? So I'm going to pull up the report, and then I'm going to go through some of my notes on this. Then I'm going to go through my article on this, or a thread on this, and then perhaps my article on this, or I'll just share my article depending on time. And then, and then we can see where we're at in terms of the analysis of all of this. So here is the UN-sponsored so-called Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights report on Xinjiang, right? On human rights concerns in the Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China. So here is the report, and I'm just going to go through some notes that I had. I want to just go one by one. So I'm not going to go through. We would be here forever. This is a book length, all right? just know that the first 8 to 10 pages of this report are background, and I'll show you quickly. See, you have the background in the introduction. So a lot of this, and even this, China's legal and policy framework for countering extremism in quotes, quote unquote, extremism and terrorism. You can see all the quotes here, terrorism. You can kind of get a sense that the first 10 pages is a lot of definitions. It's a lot of information. It's kind of wasted breath. It's assuming that you don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? And to me, it's a lot of wasted words. It's very much about summary, all sorts of all sorts of review on the allegations that have been made, except again, no genocide in this. No genocide, no mention of the word. I could show you that, but I don't want to jump around the document. No mention of genocide. So they talk about definitions, summary. What is terrorism according to China? What is terrorism according to the UN? A lot of it is very similar, and it's not really that alarming, right? This introduction. So I'm not even going to spend time on it. What I want to say, though, actually, with this summary or this introduction, I want to go to paragraph 21 because there's some interesting hypocrisy here. We're heading to the 2001 September 11th anniversary. So I want to show you how they talk about this. They talk about this in a very problematic way. Terrorism. Okay, this is the section on clarity, breadth, and scope of the concepts of terrorism and extremism, in quotes. And so paragraph 21 says here, and let me just read this to you. There are concerns that the scope of the definition leaves the potential. So there's the definition of terrorism, they say, is very broad in China. It includes all sorts of what they say are kind of overreaches, okay? So here is how they summarize it, right? All of this, organizing, planning, preparing for conducting activities which cause or attempt to cause casualties, grave property loss, damage to public facilities, disruption, and other serious harm. Advocating terrorism is also considered terrorism. Organizing, leading, or participating in terrorist organizations, providing information, funds, labor services, support, assistance. They say this is in and other terrorist activities. They say, and this is an unofficial translation, by the way, which is a point that we will talk about. But anyway, so what they're saying is this is so broad, right? It's such a broad definition that the acts of legitimate protest, dissent, and other human rights activity or of genuine religious activity can fall within the ambit of terrorism or terrorist activities, and consequently for the imposition of coercive legal restrictions on legitimate activity protected under international human rights law. So basically what they're saying, right, and this is just the hypocrisy of what this all means. They're saying that China's definition of terrorism, which is almost mirrors exactly how international human rights law defines it, that because China defines it like that, it could be used broadly, right? It could be. And this is another part of this report that is amazing. I just want to point out this one point of hypocrisy is that there is not one Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights report on how terrorism in Washington has been used to, one, suppress dissent, create an incredibly violent police and prison state and mass incarceration and mass surveillance state on everybody, especially oppressed people. But everybody has been terrorized by this surveillance state. And then, of course, use terrorism as a justification to wage wars abroad, the most brutal wars of this century. So there's no report on that. But we're supposed to believe here, again, this is a theme in the report, that China could use this broadly to suppress dissent. No citations, no examples, just a hint, just a concern that we should all be scared, right? That China could do this. But no mention of how this is a very regular occurrence among the United States and the Western countries. This is what they do all the time with terrorism. They say something's terrorism and extremism when it is or it isn't. It doesn't even matter. Then they just blanket everyone. I don't know if you remember, but Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, they were being hunted and terrorized and arrested and detained and all of that, right? People were being tortured in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, and it was all because of terrorism. but no mention of specifics, right? So that's just one example. I just wanted to bring that up really quick as one example, how there's never any specifics in these reports. And so one thing I want to mention about this report that's very important, okay, is that, and we're going to get to the sources, we're going to get to all of that. But this report refuses to cite, I kid you not, there's not one citation or reference to any of the attacks that occurred in China. None. This whole report makes you believe that China just responded to nothing, that China is just doing this out of its own volition. It just decided one day, oh, we've got to create a policy of de-radicalization just because. Well, actually, there were hundreds of attacks, hundreds upon thousands. Chinese government says thousands of attacks, and that hundreds upon hundreds of people were killed and or injured. No mention of that. So that should just tell you where this report is coming from. It wants you to believe that China has constructed policy that they deem to be of human rights concern, of international human rights concern, that their policy absolutely has no basis to it. So we're already starting from a very low level here. I mean, we're talking about a very elementary level, and it only gets worse.